Just to give a quick overview, vendor take back is essentially homeowner financing. So we cut out the banks and the owner of the property provides the financing to the buyer.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ian Roswell with Life in Vancouver, and this is
I'm Mark Hammer with Hammer Group Realtors, and we're here today to talk about
the vendor take back,
VTB.
also known as homeowner financing.
So, I've been selling real estate for 30 years, since 1995. And I just recently, in the last couple of years, started doing VTBs, vendor takebacks.
Just to give a quick overview, vendor take back is essentially homeowner financing. So we cut out the banks and the owner of the property provides the financing to the buyer.
Yeah.
Seller provides the financing to the buyer. We'll get more into this.
Anyways, and so it came to me first. I had a listing and it was really almost impossible to sell. It needed a lot of work to it. And, the realtor said, would the seller finance the home for the buyer? And I'm like, well, that's not a bad idea. And then I talked to a commercial broker because it's quite common in the, in commercial real estate.
So for residential, it was more common in, say, the 80s when we had 21%, 20% interest rates. So it was beneficial for the seller to do this kind of thing because that's a good interest.
It was the only way to sell properties back then.
Right.
So anyways, this realtor came to me and said, would your person be interested in doing a vendor take back? And I ran it through with the commercial realtor that I had the listing with. And, we came up with a clause that was created by a bunch of lawyers that he used. And we did it. Was
this a clause? Was it as a clause from commercial real estate? Is that where you guys pulled it from? Or?
Well, yeah, it was one of his clauses that he uses that was done by, a group of lawyers.
Yeah.
So it's a very good clause.
Yeah.
And, it's a first mortgage. So you're not being the second mortgage. You're a first mortgage in the vendor take back.
Now, just to clarify, what's the difference between, say, a first mortgage and a second mortgage?
Well, the first mortgage is if anything happens, you're the first in line.
Right. So if someone goes bankrupt or anything like that, the first mortgage, they get paid out first, and then the second mortgage, and then the third mortgage, and that would be like if people are refinancing with a B or C lenders, it kind of goes down, and there's more risk, and that's why those second and third mortgages are a lot of times higher interest rates. Yeah.
So first mortgage, and I don't think we'd really want there to be any other mortgages. So we did the mortgage 18 months.
Okay.
And we did 50% of the value.
Okay, so
of the home.
So it was like a 50% down payment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what was the interest rate on that? Do you remember?
It was like 6%.
Great interest rate.
Yeah, and what's the interest rate now is like, anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5.
Yeah.
Or 6.
Right.
So 18-month term, and at the end of that term, it goes, the seller gets the rest of the money.
Right.
And, I learned that there's a tax advantage for sellers doing a vendor take back because for capital gains, you can draw it out over a couple of years.
Right. So rather than getting all that money right away, if it's not your principal residence,
that's right.
It's your second or third or investment property kind of thing.
So there's some tax benefits to it. And if the person doesn't pay their mortgage payments, you can take over the property again.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one. So how does that work? Like, it's not like I just get my property right back. I have to go into foreclosure proceedings and stuff like that. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's written right in the contract that you have that if they don't make their payments, that you can,
go into a foreclosure proceeding.
Go into a foreclosure proceeding and take over the property.
And now, would you have to give them any money back or anything like that? Or would that just be like, would you just get the property back and resell it with all that down payment? You keep it kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you get all your money back.
Yeah.
and you own the property again.
Right. So you get the money. You keep the money they've given
Yeah.
you already.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I remember a few years back, there was a rent to own kind of thing.
Yeah.
This isn't that.
Well, I used to do those too. Yeah, this is different.
What would be the difference between like a rent to own and a vendor take back?
So rent to own, when we were doing them back, very popular back in 96, 97, because that was a tough market back then. And the only way to sell new developments is that we did a rent to own. And so what we would do is we would have the rent, which would be higher than a normal rent. And part of that rent goes towards the down payment.
Goes towards the principal. So you're essentially getting a place without putting a down payment down, but
that's
just
right.
kind of renting.
With the option to buy it.
With the option to buy it later.
Yeah, and that was great. Now, that was when we were selling brand new townhomes for $250,000.
Right.
So now it would be a little different. And things were a little looser with qualifying for mortgages.
Right. But wouldn't it, like, something like a vendor take back would be a better option than a rent to own? It would be kind of similar.
Well,
it's kind of similar. Like you're putting a down payment down though, of course.
That's right. Well, a significant down payment.
Yeah.
So like the last vendor take back that you did.
Yeah. So just a little history. I did 2 this year, and I'm trying to do a third, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I spent 30 years in the business and only have been doing them recently. And you've been in the business now. This is your...
Yeah, it's coming on my second year.
Second year.
And I'm
You've done 2.
But it's been a great tool, and I learned it from him. We were challenged with a property that the seller wanted too much for the property. It was full of stuff. It was a hoarder house. It was in rough shape. There was no way you're going to get financing for it. So people were making cash offers, and they were making very low cash offers because it has to make sense for them. They have to put a lot of money into it. I mean, the garbage removal or the stuff removal was like $40,000 alone. So offering the vendor take back, all of a sudden there was people coming to the table. They were willing to pay more for the property because of that vendor take back. And the interest rate was decent. I think the seller was going to put their money into a GIC at 5%, and we got them 6.5%.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one I did was it was a co-op that wasn't set up properly, and you couldn't get financing for it. So then we came back, and I wasn't representing the seller, I was representing the buyer, and we ended up getting the property for less. And then the vendor take back came in later, and then we got even more of a discount on it because it was a huge down payment, so a small mortgage. But it just made sense, and that seller wanted out, so we got it for less, and we got a great interest rate on it. It's a good tool to use, and you can cut out the bank. You can negotiate the interest rate. So if you're on the buyer side, you can negotiate for less. If you're on the seller side, you negotiate for more, obviously. Now coming into say lower interest rate market, do you still see a need for them?
Yeah.
And because primarily a lot to do with the fact that you can deduct your income.
Well, I mean,
capital gains.
Well, there's that's one part of it. I mean, it's a pretty small part of it, but I think the major part is some properties you just can't finance. So if you have a house that, say it needs a renovation, well, you can renovate that house, and then at the end of that 18-month term, it can qualify for a real mortgage, a first mortgage from a bank.
Huh.
So that's the big one. Right? Because there's properties out there just not financeable.
Right.
Like that hoarder house. Or there's something with regards to the property, maybe it's the zoning or something, it's not quite right.
Oh, so you can go in and fix the zoning and then go get proper financing. I mean, it's kind of like what's happening with that co-op, right? They didn't set up the co-op properly. Yep. Go in, do the vendor take back, and then they have time. We actually negotiated a 5-year term on that.
That's crazy.
5-year term for that.
How did you negotiate a 5-year term?
Because we needed time. So if they're going to try and subdivide the property, because essentially it's 3 houses on one joint land that's owned together. They tried to do a co-op, but they didn't set it up properly.
And you can't
So
finance
you can't
that.
finance it. So what they want to try to do is subdivide, but the lots might be too small to subdivide, but you kind of have to, but it takes a couple of years for the zoning to change and do the subdivision.
Yeah.
Or they can try and stratify it, but you got to put in sprinklers and alarm system and all that kind of stuff. Or to do the co-op properly, it's going to cost extra money. So they just needed more time. So we did 5 years on that. With an option, you can renew it too. Like if the seller wants to give you more time, they can do it.
Sure, you can do whatever you want.
Right.
Where I find there's good potential with vendor takebacks is with development properties.
Right. I was gonna ask you about that. Yeah. Elaborate.
Well, I mean, the bank's only going to finance you so much, right? And this way, if someone's sitting on a bunch of equity, they don't need all their equity at once, then a vendor takeback will allow, the developer to go in, apply for permits, start the process, maybe even do some pre-sales.
Right.
And then they've got a project that's worth something and the bank will come in and finance it.
So it's almost like a way for the seller, say a seller's moving out of their house, they've been in there for 50 years, the house is in rough shape, it's going to get redeveloped. It's a way for the seller to kind of get a piece of the pie of what the developer's doing a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Now this would work for, say, the classic front back duplex that's so popular right now in Vancouver. Would that work? Like, say you got a smaller builder. Would the smaller builder be interested in doing a vendor take back like that?
Gosh, think about it. It takes a year to build these things. It takes 6 months to get the permits. Well, 6 months and a year is 18 months, which is your typical VTB.
Right.
Now, that's a great opportunity because now that person doesn't have to go and qualify for a mortgage at the bank.
Yeah.
And they can just use their money for building the property.
Building
the project.
Yeah, and another one too, touching back on that, not needing to go to the bank, it's people that are self-employed. Those rent-owns were pretty good for people that were self-employed.
Yeah.
That didn't have a long period. Like, they were doing well, but they didn't have enough record of income to qualify for the mortgage.
Yeah, it was really, when we were doing that, we had a lot. I sold one of the units was to this Filipino girl. And she had all her family and aunt, her cousins, they all bought into this project. And, I think there was 17 units and I think I sold 4 of them to this one family. And it was a great opportunity. These people are pretty new to the country to own real estate.
Yeah, but they couldn't necessarily get a mortgage because they're new to the country or they didn't have a track record.
Or the down payment, right?
Or the down payment, yeah.
Yeah.
But the vendor take back works like that because the person I'm working with right now, they're self-employed. They want to buy a property, but they don't have the 2-year track record income to qualify for lending from a chartered bank. So we're looking at doing a vendor take back for, say, 18 months or 2 years, and then by that time they have their self-employed income is they can claim it and then get a proper mortgage.
But they still have to have a big down payment, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, for, because mostly I represent sellers these days. And so if I get someone coming in and wanting to do a vendor take back, I'm going to ask for as much down as possible.
Totally. But that's all a negotiation too, right?
Yeah.
There's no rule. If I'm representing the buyer and I'm like, hey, Mark, I got 20% down, but they really want to do something, we'll do an 8% or 8.5% interest
Wow.
rate.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? You got to kind of pay to play, right?
Sure.
So you kind of you figure it out, right?
Sure do.
You don't have, if that's what you have to do, then you do it. But it's just a great tool and it's a great option. I don't know.
Well, absolutely. And I'm pretty excited to see you do these because how many other realtors do you know that have done vendor takebacks in the residential sector of real estate?
Well, yeah, nobody does. Yeah, people that I've talked to, they just said they've never done them.
Yeah.
But albeit the interest rates were low, there was not really a lot of incentive to do them. But
No.
I still think there's still a market for them. Even when the interest rates do drop, there's still a reason to do them.
Well, think about it. If you had an opportunity, you see an investment property that you want to buy, and it's not making financial sense the bank sees it as like, oh, this is too much of a liability, we're not going to do it. But you see, hey, I can turn this thing around. I can, clean it up, and I can get a conventional mortgage on it.
Yeah.
18 months later, you've got another property you're owning at a lower interest rate.
Yeah. Really good for renovators.
Yeah.
Yeah. Renovators, builders, and yeah. Cool.
And what I like about it is there's no red tape.
Right. Well, that's it. It's whatever whatever we negotiate.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's great. Huh. Well, if you want to cut the banks out, take a look at it.
There you go. Cut the banks
out. If you
out.
have any more questions about them, feel free to reach out to myself or to Mark.
You got it.
Cheers.
VTB.
VTB.